All right, let's dive in. Today's deep dive is a special request, folks. We're tackling Aristotle's De Anima.
On the soul.
On the soul,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a dense one,
Oh, it is.
but it's fascinating. It's one of those texts that's had this, like, ripple effect across, well, like, centuries of philosophy and even science.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do our best to unpack it today. And we've got, we've got De Anima, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
But to really get into it, you've pulled in some other texts by Aristotle, too.
Yeah, I thought it'd be helpful to see how this idea of the soul kind of plays out across his thinking. So we've got the Poetics, we've got the history of animals.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. Athenian Constitution is in there.
Okay.
And then, just for good measure, the works of Aristotle, the famous philosopher.
I love it. Okay, so big question. Before we even jump into De Anima itself, why Aristotle? Why is he such a towering figure?
Oh, man. Where do we even begin? I mean, this is the guy who tutored Alexander the Great.
Yeah, that's right.
So talk about pressure.
Like, no pressure, right?
Yeah. But he also, like, laid the groundwork for logic, for ethics, for politics, physics. I mean, you name it, he probably had something to say about it.
And De Anima, his work on the soul, that's kind of at the heart of it all, wouldn't you say?
It really is. He's trying to understand, like, what makes us alive? How do we perceive the world? What is the nature of consciousness? It's all in there.
Yeah, when I hear the word soul, I got to admit, I kind of think like mystical, spiritual,
Yeah.
maybe a little spooky even. Is that how Aristotle saw it?
Not quite. I mean, it's definitely philosophical, but for Aristotle, the soul, or psyche, the Greek word, it was the principle of life itself. It's what animates things, what gives them form and purpose, like a plant grows and animal senses, we think.
Right.
That's all the soul at work.
So does that mean, like, my houseplant has a soul? Like, is it having an existential crisis over there right now?
Probably not. Aristotle, he distinguished between different kinds of souls based on, well, like their capabilities. So plants, they've got what he called a nutritive soul. It's focused on growth, nutrition, reproduction. Animals, they have a sensitive soul, right? They can sense, they can move around. And then us humans, we've got that rational soul, the one with thought and reason.
I'm starting to see the levels here. But let's go back to that idea of the soul being the principle of life. So for Aristotle, was it a separate thing from the body? Like, do we have this soul that's, you know, hanging out somewhere waiting to be reunited with the body after we die?
That's a great question. And actually, Aristotle, he argued that the soul and the body are inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. He uses this analogy of a wax seal. You can't have the imprint without the wax, right?
Right.
So the soul, it's what makes the body alive, not something that exists, you know, independently.
That's a really different way of thinking about it than what we often hear. So what led him to that conclusion?
Well, Aristotle, he was all about observation, about evidence. I mean, he spent a ton of time studying animals, like dissecting them, watching their behavior, comparing different species. And he saw how intricately the physical and the, well, like the lively were connected.
So he's not just sitting in an armchair, you know, philosophizing in the abstract.
No.
He's out there getting his hands dirty, actually looking at the world around him.
Exactly. He was looking for, like, the principles that govern life in all its forms.
Yeah.
You know, from the simplest organisms to the human mind.
Okay, I'm starting to get why we've got all these different books lined up. This isn't just about the soul in some abstract sense, but about, like, really understanding how living things work.
Absolutely. And that human mind, that rational soul, that's where things get even more interesting.
All right, well, let's talk more about that rational soul. What made it so special for Aristotle? What makes us us?
Yeah, let's get into that.
Okay.
That rational soul, that's where Aristotle really digs into what makes us human. We share the nutritive and sensitive souls with plants and animals, but the rational one, that's all about thought, reason, you know, the ability to think about thinking.
So not just reacting to the world, but actually, like, making sense of it, asking why.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, the mind, or nous in Greek, that was the highest faculty of this rational soul. It's what lets us, you know, form concepts, make judgments, all that good stuff. But, and this is key, he didn't see the mind as separate from the body. Remember that wax seal analogy?
Yeah.
Still applies here.
So our minds aren't off in some other realm, detached from our bodies and our experiences.
Nope, not for Aristotle. He thought our minds are shaped by, well, by our interaction with the world. We take in information through our senses and our minds. They process that information, forming memories and understanding.
Okay, so how does that work?
He even described memory as leaving, like these impressions in the soul, almost like marks on a wax tablet. Every experience we have leaves a little mark shaping who we are.
That makes sense. But if the mind is so grounded in the body, how do we grasp like big abstract ideas?
Right.
Like justice, beauty, truth, or even that concept of hoarseness you mentioned earlier?
That's where Aristotle's concept of the active intellect comes in. So imagine you're looking at a field of flowers, right? Your senses are taking in all those colors, the shapes, the smells.
Right.
That's your passive intellect at work, just gathering data.
Passive intellect, so like taking a mental snapshot.
Exactly. But then the active intellect kicks in. It's like a sculptor, taking that raw material and shaping it into something meaningful. It recognizes patterns, makes connections, forms concepts. So from a bunch of different flowers, you get the idea of flowerness.
I see. So we move from specific experiences to these general understandings.
Exactly. And Aristotle thought this process of abstraction, this was key to knowledge. It's how we understand the principles behind things, the forms that give shape to the world.
So the active intellect, that's what lets us think like philosophers, to grapple with those big questions.
You got it. It's what sets us apart, allows us to contemplate the nature of things, understand cause and effect. But here's where it gets really interesting. Aristotle's ideas about the mind and knowledge, they weren't limited to just philosophy. They actually had big implications for how he understood other fields, like art.
Wait, are we going to talk about Aristotle as an art critic now?
We are. He talks about this in his Poetics, specifically how tragedies, they evoke these strong emotions in the audience through sight and sound. He really understood the power of sensory experience to move us, to teach us.
That's amazing. It seems like every time we dig into Aristotle's thinking, we find these connections to other fields.
He was a true polymath, always searching for knowledge, and his insights about the soul, they weren't just theories. He believed they had practical implications for, well, how we live our lives.
Okay, so how do we put these ideas about the soul into practice? How do we live a good life, according to Aristotle?
Well, for Aristotle, living a good life, it wasn't about following like a set of rules.
Right.
It was about cultivating virtue, things like courage, justice, temperance, wisdom.
Right.
And these virtues, he didn't think they were just, inborn.
Hmm.
You have to develop them through practice and habit.
So it's like learning to play an instrument or something. You don't just wake up one day knowing how to play the piano.
Right. Exactly. It's like becoming virtuous. It's this process of training your rational soul, learning to use your mind to make good choices, control your desires, act in accordance with reason.
So it's all about finding that balance between our emotions and our rational minds.
Yeah, he saw emotions as a natural part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
But they needed to be guided by reason. Like, uncontrolled anger can lead to bad decisions, right? But a well-directed sense of justice that can motivate us to fight for what's right.
So like emotions are the fuel and reason is the steering wheel.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. It shows how Aristotle saw the soul as this complex system,
Yeah.
different parts working together to
Mhm.
create this harmonious whole.
Right.
And he thought, to be truly happy, we have to cultivate all aspects of the soul.
Okay.
Our physical well-being, our emotions, and our intellectual capacities. It all matters.
This is really starting to click for me now. He's not just interested in like abstract theories about the soul.
No.
It's about like how we actually live fulfilling, meaningful lives.
Exactly. Understanding the soul, it was a guide to living well, not just an intellectual exercise.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's amazing to see how Aristotle connected all these different ideas, from plants and animals to humans.
Yeah.
From the basics of life to the human mind.
It's all connected for him.
He was a true polymath,
He really was.
trying to create this like unified understanding of the world.
A tapestry of knowledge, like you said earlier.
Speaking of which, we've talked about the individual soul, but I'm curious about how his ideas connected to his views on like society.
Yeah, that's a great point. Remember how he said humans are social creatures by nature?
Yeah.
He believed that a well-ordered society was essential for us to develop our rational souls fully. It's in communities that we learn to interact, to practice virtue, to work towards the common good.
So our individual souls are shaped by the society we live in.
Definitely. He thought that laws, customs, institutions, they all played a part in shaping our character and guiding us towards virtue.
So it's not just about individual effort, but about creating the right kind of environment.
Right. And he even wrote a whole book about this called The Athenian Constitution.
Oh, that's right.
Where he analyzed different forms of government and their impact on human flourishing.
Wow. It seems like there's always more to discover with Aristotle.
It really is.
Every time we peel back a layer, there's another layer underneath.
And that's the thing about great thinkers, right? They leave us with more questions than answers,
Yeah.
but they also give us the tools to keep exploring, to keep asking those big questions about life, the universe, everything.
And we've certainly been asking some big questions in this deep dive.
We have.
I feel like my mind has been stretched in all sorts of directions.
That's a good thing. A little mental stretching. Never hurt anyone.
Well, a huge thank you to you
Mm.
for being such a fantastic guide through this philosophical jungle.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
It's been a wild ride, but I feel like we've really gotten to the heart of Aristotle's ideas about the soul.
I think so too. And, for everyone listening, don't stop exploring. Keep those minds open and those questions coming.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for this deep dive, folks. See you next time.